Hello, thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today I'm going to explore Saturn's retrograde, which begins on May the 23rd and goes on until the 11th of October. As usual, I'm going to look into the event chart of when Saturn actually goes retrograde to see what that informs us of the wider circumstances of what happens. I'm then going to share with you a series of key aspects. So when Saturn's actually interacting with other planets across each of those months through to October. So that will give you a much sharper insight into how it's going to impact. And then finally, as usual, I'll do a zodiac sign overview for each of the 12 signs in relation to what you can expect Saturn's impact to be upon yourself. Now, if you're new to my channel, I'd be delighted if you would subscribe. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. If you're looking to ascend above zodiac sign astrology and learn a lot more about what makes you tick as an individual, please check out my special offer combination package of your character analysis and 12-month forecast, and there's 30% off. Please see the link beneath this video. So I've set the scene, so now let's share the wheel on the screen. And you can see that when Saturn goes into retrograde, it's at 13 degrees 31 minutes in Aquarius. Now let's just widen our thinking a little bit here. Saturn is the co-regent of the sign of Aquarius. The other newer ruler is Uranus. And of course, these two have been in combat since the second week of January this year and will be broadly within 3 degrees at a right angle through to the third week of July, and then in the last 5 weeks of 2021. So it is the standout influence of this whole year, there's no doubt about it. But 13 degrees in astrology, if we take the 30 degrees of each zodiac sign, we can divide them by 12 units. This is known as the 12th harmonic, or dwards. So the particular degree when this retrograde begins is influenced by the sign of Cancer, even though it's actually in Aquarius, using the 12th harmonic. So what I would say is that our emotional well-being is something that Saturn's going to be highlighting during this retrograde. Now also, when the event occurs, the ascendant, based as usual in terms of my chart on Universal Central Time and Greenwich in London, is actually in Leo. And also, if we look at the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, so the Sun is obviously in Gemini and the Moon is in the sign of Libra, the midpoint between the two of them is at 10 degrees in the sign of Leo. So it's just tucked up behind that ascendant. Now the ascendant is, if you like, the personality of this event. So the personality of this event, strangely, is very Leonian. So it's saying to us, look, we want to express ourselves, the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, the balance of, it's nothing to do with gender or sexual orientation, the balance between the more masculine and feminine energies of the Moon and the Sun is Leo too. So we're wanting to be more outgoing, we're wanting to be more flamboyant. And of course, a lot of this is informed by the fact that we do or have been in a very long series of lockdowns and restrictions. And for some places in the world, obviously COVID is still very entrenched and very dangerous. But if you are lucky enough to be in a part of the world where you can emerge, the desire to do so is really intensified by this particular event point. So when the retrograde begins, which is 10:19 a.m. BST, so that's British summertime, it means the ascendant and the midpoint are in Leo, and that desire to be more expressive, more outgoing, more playful. But we do have, of course, the role of Uranus, and you can see from the wheel that Uranus therefore is in a square still with Saturn and also with that midpoint, and also with that ascendant. So this points towards a general sense of restlessness. There are three major influences on this year, I feel. The first is definitely Saturn squaring Uranus. The second is actually Saturn in a wonderful trine with the North Node. And that's actually emphasized on this particular situation. The North Node is like the societal direction of travel. And you can see in this chart, it's in the 11th house of interaction, community, sociability. So that's a sensational place for it to be. It's also pretty close to the sun, less than 8 degrees away, and even closer to Venus. And Venus is very close to Mercury in its dignity in the sign of Gemini. So we have a stellium in Gemini when this event begins, and that also is very interactive. So with that Leonian ascendant, the Leonian midpoint, all that energy in Gemini, I think there is a desire to interact. But that T-square between Uranus, the ascendant, the midpoint, and on the other side of the heavens, Saturn, suggests to me that the Dward, or the 12th harmonic, which is informing that position of Saturn, for me, it's relationships of all kinds, which could be tested most of all by this retrograde over the months to come. And that's because Saturn is opposite the ascendant, so it's bang on the 7th house cusp, and it's also opposite the midpoint. So even if we have a desire to be more outgoing, more playful, more interactive, there's still going to be a need to be mindful about what we're doing and how it impacts on other people, particularly if we're in an involved relationship. Now, if you're footloose and fancy 3, I think this chart is kind of saying to you, look, your desire to connect with people is going to be very strong, but you might be surprised that that playfulness is soon replaced by a consciousness that it's not quite so easy to meet the needs, the emotional and spiritual needs that we've all become much more conscious of over the last year and a half through COVID. It's not going to be quite the walk in the park that we'd all like, but Saturn's trine to the North Node is suggesting if we work at it, if we work at our communication with others, we stay conscious that it's not just about how we see things. Other people see things differently, and the more we listen, the better we can do. So this Saturn return event, for me, is definitely speaking for the need to be responsible around our relationships. But I said to you that there were 3 things that were vitally important this year. And the third is the angle that's been going on for most of the year between Neptune and Pluto. Now, it's a little bit broad. In this particular chart, there are about less than 5 degrees in a sextile. Pluto's about transformation, but material transformation in the sign of Capricorn. Neptune's in its home zone of Pisces, and in this chart, in the 9th house of enlightenment. But also we have Jupiter, the co-regent of Pisces, is back in the sign of Pisces on a temporary basis through to the 28th of July, and then it will come back in for the last 3 days of the year. So we have an unusual event with Jupiter in that it's burst into the sign of Pisces this year. It's not stayed in Aquarius for 12 full months, which generally the Jupiter transits are around about 12-month units, and therefore the whole cycle takes about 12 years. It's a bit different, and then next year Jupiter fires into Aries, as well as spending, of course, some extra time in Pisces. But I think that sextile between Neptune and Pluto is asking us all to find a higher harmonic, a higher vibration about how we live our lives. So it's not so much based on consumerism. It's not so much based on feeding a kind of desire to try and get some kind of satisfaction, which is not quite obvious to us. Some of the answers therefore lie within us. So I think that's a very important transit that's going on all this year. So just to recap on this event, I think the critical things are that Saturn continues that square with Uranus, and that's going to continue through till around about the 3rd week of July. And how I would characterize that, and I think it is going to intensify through this retrograde, I'd characterize it as tension because they're both in fixed signs. Uranus is in its fall in the sign of Taurus. It doesn't like being there. Saturn is in Aquarius, which it governs, but we must remember that Aquarius people, or the sign of Aquarius, has a duality to it. On one hand, it is about progression and innovation, which comes from Uranus, and quirkiness. On the other hand, it's very much about maintaining the status quo. And I think Saturn in Aquarius is kind of like some of the old way it's always been done, especially when Saturn went through that transit through Capricorn. Which went on until the 16th of December last year. And of course, Saturn also popped into Aquarius from the 22nd of March to the 2nd of August last year as well, before rewinding and going back into Capricorn. So I think what we're seeing is a progression of the way we do things, the way we think. And I think Saturn in Aquarius is pushing us to reform our structures, which is what Saturn informs, but reform them in a way which works for the future, but doesn't destroy the past. But then when we put the planets, the two rulers of Aquarius, in direct conflict, which we have most of this year, that's created a lot of inattention, a lot of frustration. We've seen a lot of social unrest, which I did predict at the start of this year. And I think that sense of tension or sense of restriction can increase during this retrograde. I can only be truthful about that. But how far will Saturn rewind? Well, the truth of it is it's going to go back to 6 degrees 52 minutes. So the gap, the retrograde in total, is 6 degrees 79. So yeah, about 7 degrees it's going to wind back. And I'm going to show you the wind out wheel now. So when we get back to October, we've actually got some really exciting things here, because you can see from the chart that Mercury, Mars, which to be fair is not at its best in Libra, but the Sun are all together in Libra, and they're all forging a wonderful trine with Jupiter. But it is true that the square between Saturn and Uranus is much weaker, because there's about a 6-degree gap because of the inversion. Uranus is also moving into retrograde as well, but it's inverted. Saturn's inverted because it started its retrograde much earlier. So I think that impact is still going to be there. But as we come out of this event, we also have a gathering of energy in the sign of Sagittarius. It is in the 4th house, which is still asking us to be mindful of our emotional base. But it is, very potentially vibrant and playful. So the moon's in a wonderful sextile with Mercury, Mars and the Sun, and also with Jupiter. So I think when we come out of this event, I feel that a lot of lessons will be learned about trying to go through transformation in a way which works for us all, but understanding that change very rarely comes without pain. So whether it's the change to the working week, we're talking about universal credit. So not universal credit, the benefit, which is obviously being quite strongly discredited at times in the UK. What I'm talking about is where everybody gets a payment from central government, and we maybe work towards a time where people will work less hours full time. And then that will create more employment for more people, but we won't work as many hours. Now that would be a very enlightened way of working with Saturn in Aquarius. Of course, another thing is working from home. That's been driven very much by COVID. But I think lots of people were working from home anyway. It just became more mainstream. But then there's the other more onerous sides of reform and change which are coming. And that's, as you know, is to do with automation, robotics, artificial intelligence. And I personally am quite concerned about some of the developments in that area, because I feel it will lead to changes that people are not perhaps recognising won't always be for a good thing. We can have good medical scientific changes, but not necessarily with a consideration of where this is all ending up. But my point is that when we get back to Saturn going direct on the 11th of October, I do feel we're going to burst out of that in quite an upbeat way. But the thing I would point out to you is that Saturn and the North Node are still very much in touch. They're only less than 4 degrees apart in a wonderful trine. So that was one of the defining influences of this year, if you remember. So that's where we are open to new ideas, which is being informed by the North Node in Gemini, which is all about learning ideas, quick exchanges of information. And Saturn, remember, anchors things. It's got an awful reputation in astrology, but it's the anchor. It provides the glue. It gives us the discipline to turn up on time. It gives us the persistence to keep going when life's difficult. It gives us the application and the perspiration where we're inspired to really go for it. And I can assure you that in the one-to-one readings that I do for clients, often, very, very often, I can see evidence of Saturn transits bringing rewards, but we have to put the effort in the first place. So just to summarize, as the event begins, if you would just bear with me, we have an opportunity to be much more playful, certainly in the Western world, much more interactive, have an opportunity to spend time mixing and mingling. But I think we're going to be quite surprised by how, after a while, we start to relate to that opportunity. I think a new reality has come in, and I think Saturn being in opposition to the midpoint, the ascendant, and squaring with Uranus is going to see us a little bit more needing of a deeper, meaningful connection with others. And that's really what this Saturn retrograde is going to represent. But let's have a little look now through the months. So, if we look at June, what I would say to you, as you know, all month Saturn is squaring Uranus. But it is also true that at the very start of the month, the Sun in Gemini forges a wonderful trine to Saturn. So that's going to pick up on that theme of the North Node, where we use ideas constructively, where we use technology in an enlightened way. It can create better connections to others. So we can't just think that Saturn retrograde is going to be a mightily gloomy event. It happens every year. You know, this is something that's gone on for many, many years. And it's just asking us to become more conscious of where we can make improvements in the areas that Saturn's impacting on our personal natal horoscope. Now that can be on your nativity, it can be on your progress chart, it can be on your solar arc directions, it can be on a solar return. It just depends, but certainly where Saturn's active in your natal chart, not your sun sign forecast alone, that's where you're going to get a critical influence. So for example, in my case, I have a gathering of energy in the sign of Aquarius, all around 12 degrees Aquarius. That's the moon, Venus, and also Chiron. And they're all going to be affected very strongly all this year by Saturn. So how does that feel? Well, I'm moving. I'm changing my home. I'm using the building capacity of Saturn to build up a new domestic structure, the fourth house. So we must see Saturn in a positive light, as well as being conscious that it can be a very restrictive energy for sure. So in June, first week, great opportunity to exchange ideas. Remember, all month it's forging a brilliant link with the North Node, but it is in that square with Uranus, which can create a lot of tension and frustration. Now, July. From the 4th to the 9th, Saturn is opposite Venus. If there's a relationship in your world that's not working very well, it could undoubtedly come under the astral microscope. And if it is or has been really bumping along the bottom, it could end. On the 22nd of July, Saturn and Uranus formally end their square within 3 degrees. Now you may think, why do I use 3 degrees? Did I like the pop group? No, I didn't really like them, to be honest. That was a little bit too light and frilly. So I like sort of more deeper, a bit more challenging rhythm and blues and soul. But anyway, I digress. So 3 degrees means it's very close to being exact. A lot of astrologers will focus just on exact. Some in a natal horoscope reading will go up to anything like 8 or 10 degrees concerning anything to do with the sun and the moon. I still think that's actually quite broad. So a 3-degree orb or gap gives us quite a vivid level of activity. Now in August, the first week sees Saturn opposite the Sun and Mercury, which have both moved together into the sign of Leo. If you are a Leo, if you are a Taurus, you are a Scorpio, and you are an Aquarius, and you have planets, including above the Sun, if you have planets from 0 up to 15 degrees, I do think that this year is throwing up some big challenges. You know, if you have your moon, for example, in Scorpio, or you have your Mars in Taurus at, say, around about 10 down to 8 degrees, stuff like this, all of those fixed axes, that fixed cross, are going to be very challenged by this event. I can only be honest about it. So the first week of August, Saturn is opposite the Sun and Mercury. So I think we're going to see some extra tension during that period of time, because if we think about it, the Sun's in its dignity in Leo, Saturn's in its dignity in Aquarius, and they're both competing. The Sun wants us all to go out and play, have lots of lovely warming interactions. Mercury's there. There's going to be some pronouncement on particular things. Very proud combination. And there's Saturn on the other side of the heavens saying, look, we need to be much more logical about this, because the sign of Aquarius is about air, and we need to diminish somehow some of the hubris that could come from the Sun's conjunction with Mercury at the start of August. Now from the 20th to the 25th, ironically, Venus bounced back from that tricky opposition in July to forge a really wonderful trine in the sign of Libra with Saturn. And of course Venus rules Libra, so I think that can actually be a really nice aspect if you've got a relationship that's developing of any kind where there's good dialogue. Now September, the first week, Mercury is in a fantastic angle to Saturn. The last week, the Sun's in a fantastic angle to Saturn. Week 2 of September, Venus has moved forwards into Scorpio, and it is in a square with Saturn. So that just gives you some idea of some of the challenges, but also opportunities. So that takes me back to that point. Please do not see retrogrades in very binary terms. A planet that's retrograde is really bad, and a planet that's going forwards is really fab. It's just not as simple as that. We have to deal with the reality of Saturn retrograde. The sign of Aquarius is very much about community, individuality, friendship, higher values, traditional values. It's to do in some ways with the concept of baptism. You know, why do we have the symbol of, or the glyph of the sign of Aquarius as the water carrier? Some people would say it is, some astrologers who are much more into traditional astrology would say that Aquarius was almost a water sign, because it is about higher ideals. It's being more principled. It is asking us to be more truthful. The Uranus has a reputation for being quirky, changeable, making us feel unsettled, restless, changing our mind at the last minute, needing space, and then needing intimacy. But also Uranus is the planet of truth. So we've got this change going on in the world where we're all being tested quite daily, really, by technology, by COVID itself, by different ways of working, different ways of living. We've got people staking a claim much more about their individuality. That's very Saturn in Aquarius, and we will have other people who will find these new developments very threatening, very challenging to the old orthodoxy. So all of this is going to be going on for this period of time, but remember that this Saturn return offers opportunities and it offers challenges, but that's just normal. Now please stay with me for your zodiac sign forecast. Hello Aries. Well, for you, Saturn, of course, is in your sector of friendship and most importantly, the future. But you've got to make your future work for you in a way that feels comfortable in terms of your values, which is where Uranus is. So what I would say to you, taking into account Saturn's great link with the North Node, the more you inform yourself, get genned up on all sorts of new information, the more you can find the way forwards that feels comfortable as far as those values. But if you do have some friendships or connections with people who don't share your values, and it's become more obvious in recent times that there's a divergence between you, it is, I'm sorry to say, going to continue to be more obvious. So you will move away from people who no longer share your long-term vision. So that can be painful, especially if people have been in your world for a long time. And in some cases, because of the revolutionary nature of Saturn squaring Uranus, you may have to be quite strong and brave about this. It may mean that you give up a job that's pretty well paid because you want to challenge yourself in a way which is much more meaningful. So it's an interesting retrograde for your sign for sure. Now, Taurus, obviously Saturn's high in the sky in your 10th house. This is all about success, goals, ambitions. But Uranus in your sign is making you more willfully needing to be individual to you than ever before. You're someone who's always followed the mantra of why change something, why mend something when it isn't broken. And that's a brilliant mantra. It served you well for much of your life. But over the last few years, you found yourself wanting to widen your world, to be more adventurous, to be more freedom-loving. And that's not going to stop, but I think how you work is going to become the central theme over the next months ahead through to the 11th of October. And because the North Node's in your second house of money, you have to fund the need for extra freedom that's developing within you in a way which pays the bills. Gemini. Now, having Saturn retrograde in your sister air sign of Aquarius means that there could be some limitation over the travel or the breaking out of any restrictions that you're feeling. I have to say, I think that you are being affected by the Uranus position in the heavens pretty well as much as any other zodiac sign, perhaps other than Scorpio. And that is because I perhaps could put in Leo into the mix as well, because for Leo, Uranus is in the sector of success and goals, and for Scorpio, it's in relationships. But for you, Uranus is in a very psychological part of your situation, so it's been making you feel very ragged, very on edge, and therefore Saturn in retrograde in the 9th house. The 9th house can be to do with exaggeration. Now, we never think that Saturn is very much to do with exaggeration. It's to do with contraction. But what I would say is where you want to be more idealistic, it may in some ways get pulverized by a need to get in touch with a deeper part of your nature that you may be a little reluctant to engage with because you're most comfortable processing life through the sphere of your mind, through mental communication. So if people are asking you, or life is asking you, to be more conscious of your shadow side, your emotions, the parts of your nature that are not perhaps so sweet and sugary, then that can be a tough hoe. So I think there's been a lot of nervous energy for you this year, and sadly I think that can continue unless you start to really give yourself permission to accept that you are an emotional being, and it's fine to have vulnerabilities. Once you get to that point, everything will fall into place really well. And with the North Node in your sign forging a glorious angle to Saturn, you can be the trailblazer. It's you who can actually find the new ideas, the chinks of light. So I just think it's down to your outlook around emotionality. If you're comfortable with it, perhaps because you've got a lot of Cancer in your chart, or maybe 4th or 8th or 12th house in terms of your house divisions, then you'll be fine. But if you're someone who is, very archetypically logical, I think that this square that's going on between Uranus and Saturn can continue to be quite tough for you, to be honest. Now, Cancer, with the position of Saturn in your sector of longer term resources, you probably are thinking about where you're invested most in terms of financially, practically, literally, whether it's bricks and mortar, pensions, savings, any kind of insurance policy, legacies, all these things are going to be under review with Saturn in a retrograde. But also, because he is forging that right angle to Uranus, Uranus is in your sector of new ideas, new people. So I think it's possible that some things can be breaking down in your world that actually are profoundly powerful, because the 8th house is where we've developed a sense of security. It's very Scorpionic. Scorpionic energy is fixed, just like Aquarius energy is. So the 8th house is where we feel it's going to be for the long term, but then the 8th house, as Scorpio energy does, has a tendency to suddenly change events around us in a way we can't control, and then we have to flex and adapt to the situation. And I have to be honest with you, one of the things that Cancerian people treasure most is control. Now, that's not to say that you're seeking to control others. You just like to control the emotional mechanics of your existence. And I think that this retrograde can challenge that a little bit, because where you've been very invested emotionally, sexually, financially, business-wise, that could be changing, because you're wanting to evolve in a new way through the auspices of Uranus, a new, fresher, freer way, letting go of some of your fears, spending time with people more freely, not necessarily having to use your cardinality, your leadership quality in such a dominating way to flex and go with things. But because the North Node's in your 12th house of secrets, and also there's a big manifestation of energy in this particular event in the 12th house of your situation, you may be finding some of these changes a little bit scary, but go with it, because it is going in a very good direction. And the only things that Plutonian 8th house is going to do on Saturn for you is take out of your world anything which is not really truly right for you anymore. Now, Leo, there's no doubt about it, if you're born anything from the 6th day of Leo, which is around about the 23rd. Yeah, so we'd be going, basically, if you're born in August, the last couple of days of July through to about the first week of August, Leo, this event is going to affect you big time. There's no question of that. But what Uranus is saying to you is, how do you recreate your world in terms of how you connect to the wider world? And Saturn's in your sector of relationships. So if your relationships at home are going well, this will give you the foundation to push forwards into the wider world and be more dynamic and free-spirited in your approach. And that can draw a lot of prizes to you. But I just think it feels uncomfortable. But with that gathering of energy in Gemini, do you know, it's not a case of what you know, it's a case of who you know too. And you can be absolutely brilliant at drawing goodness to you, winning people's admiration and acclaim. You know, people generally warm to you, they like you. And even if they don't like you, they generally have to respect you, because that's what you demand. So I think there is going to be some tension potentially around relationships if you're not getting the support to re-engineer your worldly role. But if you are, I think there's a lot of good in this one. But I do think you're going to be particularly affected from the end of July, Leos, through to that first week of August, Leos. Now, Virgo, the position of Saturn is interesting because it's in your 6th house of your Sun equal house chart. And therefore, that's about work, dedication, sacrifice, attention to detail, something that you have an immense appreciation of, a meticulousness. But Saturn is, of course, very restricting, and it's kind of saying to you, look, if your desire for formulatic living is polarizing your passion to be a free spirit, do you know, that has been a big theme of this year so far, and that is not going to change with this retrograde. In fact, I think you're going to become even more conscious of it. And I think with that big stellium of energy in Gemini, It's around work that a lot of Virgo people are going to be thinking again. You're given an opportunity to reach for the stars, but will you take it, or will you stay caged in a role which gives you that routine, but it does suck out the oxygen of enlightenment and excitement and unpredictability and spontaneity? If all those things are not big in your world, but steadfast, rock-fast routine is, but you are as bored as it goes, it is time for a revolution, Virgo. Now, Libra, obviously Saturn's in your sister air sign of Aquarius, which is the 5th house of play. We don't often think of Saturn as being very playful. If a person has Saturn in the 5th house of their nativity, they take play very seriously. They would take having their children, if they even have any, very seriously. But it also means that you're given an opportunity to make the most of your talents. Are you making the most of them? That gathering of energy in Gemini is saying that you, above all signs, are going to want to travel. If you can break out, if the restrictions allow you to jet off or drive off or cycle off or walk off or run off or swim off to where you want, this is going to be a good event for you. But if you're staying in a situation, particularly around your love life, I can only be honest, that isn't feeding you, it's not feeding your soul, you're staying in it because you're frightened. Let's cut away the fluff. If you're staying in something because you're too fearful to be outside of it on your own, I think that this could be quite a difficult retrograde for you. If you have the courage to advance beyond your comfort zone, this could be one of the most exhilarating periods you have ever experienced. And that is why we can't think of retrogrades as being all bad. It just doesn't work that way. But that Uranus position in your 8th house of where you're most invested, and its argument with Saturn is kind of saying that how you've been feeling all this year anyway is just going to get amplified. It's time for action if you're feeling really unhappy. Scorpio. Now, I do think Bill Gates is a Scorpio, so when all this stuff came up about the divorce, I looked at his chart and I looked at his progressions, and I could do a special, I just haven't had time. But it's all there, the breakdown in the relationship in terms of the timing, because obviously now all the noises are coming out about various things that have gone on in the background. But certainly it is an interesting thing because Saturn's in your sector of emotion, home and family, and Uranus is in your sector of freedom when it comes to relationships. So you only want to be in a relationship where you can feel free. And how can we feel free in a relationship that we're in? Because we don't feel controlled by the other person. So we're with someone who really gets us, lets us be ourselves, and yet at the same time, there is a structure, there is a dedication, there is a loyalty between those two people. So if your relationship is pretty good, I think the gathering of energy in Gemini is saying that you do need some challenges. And maybe the challenges for you could be updating your property, moving all together. It could be developing your outdoor space, because Saturn is Earth in the 4th house, very much to do with the environment. So that wouldn't be a surprise. Or perhaps you can go out with your partner and go for lovely walks in the countryside, get a bit fitter. Saturn in the 4th house can also point out maybe if there are some things that you have been putting off around your home. Maybe there's a bit of a leaky roof or a gutter that needs cleaning, or the outside of the property needs painting. Because structure is what Saturn governs, use the retrograde to make those improvements. But you won't like it if Saturn's retrograde impacts on your individual freedom to relate to people as you want, because that's what Uranus is really asking you to experience at the present time. Now, Sagittarius. Now, Saturn's in your 3rd house. Everyday ideas, brothers and sisters, neighbours, technology, quick wits, very Gemini, zip, 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 zip. Saturn's not very zip, zip, it's slow, slow, slow. But if you've always wanted to write that book, Saturn's giving you the discipline to get it together, to publish that blog, to in some ways learn some new courses to get more informed. Sagittarius people, or at least a Sagittarius, appetite for knowledge is just ferocious. I think it's absolutely inspirational. And maybe Saturn's retrograde means that, you're going to be doing a lot of reading over the next 5 months. But because of the square with Uranus, which is in your 6th house of where you need to be dedicated, routine, something that I think a lot of Sagittarius people don't really like very much, not unless you've got personal planets locked into either Scorpio or Capricorn. So if you've got a lot in Sagittarius, you're going to be a free spirit. So Uranus is asking you to reform work, diet, health, the everyday structure of your world in a way that works for you. If you're not doing it, I think nervous tension has probably been a big issue for this year for you. If you've had headaches, you've had migraines, you felt edgy, you haven't really been able to sleep very well, there's been lots of sort of waking moments, that really wouldn't be a surprise. So the retrograde can emphasize and amplify all of those emotions, but with that gathering of energy in Gemini when this event begins, you can gain a lot by interacting more closely with others. So the more you connect with others, the more you can fend off the more negative attributes of the Saturn retrograde. Now Capricorn, Saturn is your ruler. Unlike Aquarius, it's your only ruler. And so you understand Saturn very well because your basic nature is not necessarily to sprint to the finish line, but very often you like to end up winning the most glittering races. But the way you do it is often through just sheer endurance, by being very applied, by turning up at time, grinding away. When other people don't come in or are not on good form, you still put in a performance. So your sheer strength of character, determination, application is legendary. But Saturn's in your 2nd house of money. So the retrograde suggests that that could be a contraction point. But the 2nd house also represents how you think about yourself. And where Uranus is in your 5th house of pleasures and being a free spirit, if you don't have much money to be free-spirited, I do feel that you could feel a bit miserable over these next 4 or 5 months. And also because of all the planets in the sign of Gemini, which is the 6th house for you, that's very much about practicalities. Now, practicalities ordinary be something that you'd really be savouring. But I think if money is tight, and let's be honest about this, COVID has had a massive impact on a lot of people in a very harsh way. So if playing is not so easy to do at the moment for you, all you can do is be committed to using the North Node, particularly in its angle with Saturn, to try to reform your finances. And the best way to do that, is being very much in touch with trends, because that's what the North Node is very much about. It's picking up on trends. And then because of your organizational and management skills, not necessarily of anyone else, just of yourself, you can fine-tune the finer details of the strands within the reorganization to extract greater value for yourself. So even if money's a bit tight, you're having to be more flexible, you're having to sort of hop around a little bit, you can still use huge ingenuity, because that's what Uranus is giving you, to keep the faith. And also Pluto continues to transit through Capricorn, of course. If your birthday is in the last 5 or 6 days of Capricorn, you're really under its influence in a mighty way at the moment. If you're not, I think it's affecting you more about how you feel about yourself, your self-worth, to be honest. Even though it's in your sign still, it's about how you can use your individuality to give you a return which makes you feel good in that material way, which you do need, even if you're someone who's not particularly materialistic. But the angle with Neptune in your sector of ideas suggests keep the lines of communication open. There may be people who see things in a different way, have different perspectives that can inform your approach. And the more open you are to people like that, the better you're going to do. Even if this does feel that it could be a period of having to dig in. But if anyone can dig in, it's you. Which brings us to Aquarius. Now, Saturn in the first house in a natal horoscope means that that person probably never has had in their life an enormous amount of energy. They've had to use it very prudently. The first house is the body. So you may find that there are constraints on your energy. So the energy you do have has to be used shrewdly. But Uranus in the fourth house means that you're feeling very, very restless, particularly around family, emotional, home issues. As I've already shared, I'm moving, and I have heard of quite a few stories of other Aquarius people moving or changing where they live too, and that's going to continue. But the secret of this chart really is what's going on in Gemini, which is absolutely glorious. And it's saying that even if some of the changes going on feel painful, you feel stressed out, you're waking up in the middle of the night, which I am a lot, if it feels that everything's going so slow, when you're desperate for it to just go up the clappers and get a move on, and it's really frustrating, just be aware that this Saturn return event is embracing the North Node and all those planets in Gemini in an absolutely glorious way, and the best way you can go forward is to demonstrate to people that you are unique, but you believe in what makes you unique. Because if you are one of those Aquarius people that's more dominated by Saturn, and I'm one of them, to be honest, the first degree of Aquarius is in Hellenistic astrology, Saturnian, and that's where my sun is. So people often see me as being a bit Capricornian, and it's true. So the best way to make progress over this next 4 or 5 months is to be absolutely unbowed when it comes to demonstrating your creativity, your individuality, your playfulness, even if it means being a bit outspoken, and it cheeses off some people around you who actually probably need to hear a dose of your reality. Which brings us, as ever, to Pisces, never least. Of course, this event sees your two rulers in your sign, which is terrific. And if you are born right at the start of Pisces with Jupiter stationing on your sun, that's really excellent. But Saturn for all Pisces is in the 12th house. And the 12th house is of reflection, it's of separation, it's of loneliness, it's of isolation, it's of secret enemies, it's of review, it's of spirituality, it's of therapy, it's of treatment, it's anything to do with institutions, hospitals, and alike. So Saturn being here is about as cold and remote as it gets. And it's squaring up with Uranus in your third house of the nervous system, your interactions every day with people by text message, email, neighbours, siblings. So it could be that some harsh stuff, as it seems to you, is coming up into your consciousness. So the more limiting, frigid energies of Saturn is definitely being manifested more profoundly for you. But with all that gathering of energy in Gemini, there is an opportunity to take away that isolation, to find a new emotional reality. That could mean physically moving nearer to where loved ones live. It could mean joining a club in your immediate vicinity, whether it's a hobby club, whether it's some kind of book club, something where it's very companionable and you can share, but in a really nice, sweet way. The fourth house of your situation is really being blessed. But I feel that you need to nurture yourself. And if you're not nurturing yourself, one of the things that Pisces people do to an nth degree, more than any other sign, and if you have a lot of 12th house as well in your chart, you're going to get this even more, is be very sacrificing to others, particularly those who are less fortunate. So whether it's care homes, whether it's people with learning difficulties, whether it's people with very, very severe physical disabilities, a Pisces person will be in the mix, taking care, giving love, being very, very magnificent. But I think what Saturn in the 12th house is saying to you, and it will be over the next year and a half, is you have to look after you. And you have to limit the amount of compassion you show in situations if it's draining you beyond the stump. So what I would say is use the joyfulness of Jupiter in your sign, Neptune in its great link with Pluto to think about your longer term future in a more inspired way. But do try to have some emotional connection to others over this next 4 or 5 month period. So that concludes an overview for Saturn retrograde, the 12 zodiac signs. I've given you an event chart of when the event begins, when it ends. I've highlighted all the key aspects that go on during that period. And I've highlighted also the big planetary influences of this year. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay safe, take care, good luck, and goodbye.